What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. The dirty spot is gone. Before we even touch the numbers, let's clear something up. Budgets are supposed to be boring. They're meant to translate reality into spreadsheets, not turn spreadsheets into fantasy novels. But what Russia has just presented in the second reading of its federal budget bill is not a dry financial document. It's a, performance. A carefully staged ritual where everyone involved pretends that the math works, the forecasts are reasonable, and the future is still under control. Even the lawmakers voting for it openly admit that the assumptions are detached from reality completely. And yet, hands go up, approvals roll through, and the show moves on. The real problem here is not one wrong figure or even overly optimistic estimate. It's the entire logic holding the budget together. Revenues are calculated as if oil prices exist in an alternative universe. Inflation projections ignore the government's own tax hikes. Economic growth is promised in an economy already slowing down. And when you zoom out, it becomes clear that this budget is not designed to function. It's designed to just reassure. Reassure people at the very top, delay panic below, and buy time in a system that is quietly running out of it. They even had to make an amendment to the budget totaling astronomical 7 trillion rubles. Because why not? Who does not make a 7 trillion mistake, right? Just a formality. To understand how deep this illusion goes, we need to peel it layer by layer, starting with the foundation itself. So let's begin there, and then move forward step by step. At the core of this budget lies a simple assumption that oil revenues will behave the way the government needs them to behave. The projected price for Ural crude sits comfortably at levels far above what Russia is actually receiving. On paper, this makes everything else look manageable, but in reality it does completely the opposite. When your crude is trading closer to the mid-30s rather than $60 per barrel, almost 2 times lower of what you are taking into consideration. Basing your tax revenues on the higher figure is not optimism, it's just denial. And denial has consequences. The budget already shows a loss of roughly a quarter of projected oil and gas revenues compared to earlier expectations. And then, well, guess what? The year just started. At the same time, global pressure are stacking up. Export competition is intensifying, major producers are increasing output, and price discounts are becoming structural rather than temporary. None of this is reflected honestly in the numbers lawmakers are asked to approve. What makes this especially outrageous is that the authors of the budget know this. They openly acknowledge that the projections are unattainable without a miracle. Yet the document moves forward unchanged in its core parameters. How about that? Revenues remain fixed, expenses remain ambitious, the deficit is presented as manageable. This is not a budget meant to be executed. It is a never-ending draft that will be revised month after month, quietly adjusted as reality changes everything. A realistic plan would start from current pricing trends and just lower export volumes, but instead, this one assumes that the storm will pass simply because admitting otherwise would force uncomfortable decisions. And the reason for the storm passing is, once again, just a miracle. And oil is not the only contradiction. Inflation is treated with the same creative approach. The government raises consumption taxes, loosens monetary conditions, and expands borrowing, all of which push prices upward. Yet, the official forecast claims that the inflation will magically fall to target levels within a year. No advanced degree in finance is required to just see the inconsistency. You cannot step on the accelerator and insist that the vehicle is slowing down. These internal contradictions are not accidental, they are structural, and once you notice them, you start to see the same pattern everywhere. Which brings us naturally to how growth itself is being imagined in this document, a topic that deserves closer attention in our next chapter. Tax revenues depend on one thing above all else: economic growth. The larger the economy, the bigger the slice the state can take. Just makes sense, right? That is the logic behind projecting higher value-added taxes and broader tax collections. The problem is that the growth bypassing this expectation barely exists. Official forecasts now place GDP expansion at around 1%, and even that figure has been steadily revised downward. Just months ago, the same institutions spoke confidently about growth more than twice that size. Today, those earlier projections look almost embarrassing. I mean, who was even bold enough to even say them out loud? What's revealing is not just that the expectations have been lowered, but that revenues remain unchanged despite the downgrade. In other words, the economy is supposedly growing less, but somehow generating the same tax income. This just absolutely defies basic math and economics 101. Meanwhile, investment indicators are flashing warning signs. Major industrial groups expect fixed investments to shrink. Export revenues are falling. Domestic demand is under pressure from rising taxes and credit burdens. None of this points towards expansion. And yet, the budget narrative insists that next year will be better than this one. Every year they say the same, every year it just gets a little bit worse and worse. This disconnect suggests something deeper than simple miscalculation. It suggests that growth figures are being selected not because they are realistic, but because they are necessary to preserve the illusion of balance. Without them, the deficit would balloon to politically uncomfortable levels, and so growth is assumed into existence. The economy is shrinking in real terms, but growing on paper. It's just an elegant trick as long as no one asks how it works, obviously. Even within government circles, this contradiction is acknowledged quietly. Forecasts from different agencies no longer align, and revisions are frequent. But instead of adjusting expenditures or rethinking priorities, the solution is to freeze the headline numbers and let reality catch up later. I mean, this approach creates a strange situation where everyone knows the plan will not work, yet proceeds as if it might, potentially. It's just pure incompetence ordered straight from the Kremlin. I don't know what else to say. Because once you understand this, the next question becomes very obvious. If the foundation is unstable and growth is fictional, where exactly is the money going? Well, that question leads us directly into the structure of spending itself, which opens up another revealing layer we should explore next. So let's shift our focus there in the next chapter. The amendments introduced during the second reading were massive in scale, totaling 7 trillion rubles. Entire Moscow's budget, the capital of Russia, where all the money goes, was a little over 5 trillion for the last 2025. So making a tiny amendment of 7 trillion now reveals the real picture. On the surface, this suggests flexibility and responsiveness, while in practice just reveals rigidity. The overwhelming majority of these additional funds are channeled into classified expenditures and, well, defense-related needs, who would have guessed, right? The message is simple and unmistakable. These priorities are non-negotiable. Everything else adjusts around them. Beyond that core, there are selective increases that sound compassionate on paper, like funding for medical treatments, rehabilitation, assistance programs is expanded. But these allocations are real and necessary, but they are small comparing to sums absorbed by other, more Kremlin-favorable categories, the ones that we spoke, like literally 1 minute ago. Meanwhile, cuts quietly hit other areas, including subsidies for regions previously showcased strategic successes. The reduction in support suggests waning interest or simple budget exhaustion. Maintaining appearances is one thing, maintaining territories, infrastructure, and social stability is completely another. What's striking is how unevenly the burden is distributed. Cultural projects receive minimal support. Tech initiatives limp along with symbolic funding. Social programs survive, but only barely. Everything that does not serve the immediate priorities of the state is treated as optional. This creates a distorted economy where entire sectors exist in a holding pattern, waiting to see what survives the next revision. And all of this is happening while the deficit quietly grows. The official number looks manageable, but, well, it relies on assumption already proven wrong. If revenues underperform even slightly more than expected, the gap widens dramatically. The likely outcome is a sequence of incremental adjustments, each small enough to avoid panic, but together adding up to a very different fiscal reality by the end of the year. This slow-motion unraveling raises a deeper question. If everyone involved understands the risks, why continue this performance at all then? Well, the answer lies not in economics, but in psychology, and also in politics. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story. At this point, it becomes clear that the budget is not meant to convince the public. Anyone with basic access to data can see the gaps. It's just that obvious. Well, it isn't also neither designed to guide economic policy in any meaningful way. Its real audience is much narrower. This document exists to reassure the very top of the system that everything remains under control. It is optimism weaponized as a survival strategy. By presenting manageable deficits, stable revenues, and modest growth, the financial authorities avoid confronting the scale of the problem all at once. A larger, more honest deficit would force immediate decisions: spending cuts, structural reforms, or admission of failure. None of these are acceptable. Instead, the approach is gradually preparing the public for what potentially might be coming next. Adjust the numbers slowly, revise forecasts quietly, let inflation and debt do their work in the background. This method also serves as self-protection. When responsibility is diffused across forecasts, models, and external shocks, no single decision maker can be blamed outright. The process becomes ritualistic. Budgets are passed because budgets must be passed. Numbers are optimistic because pessimism would be destabilizing. The system moves forward not because it believes in its own projections, but because stopping would expose how fragile things really are. The danger, of course, is that reality, does not negotiate. Reality is reality. Math is math. Debt accumulates, reserves shrink, export revenues fluctuate beyond control. And when the ability to overspend disappears, the effects ripple outward fast. Demand shrinks, investment stalls, credit burdens become suffocating. What once looked like a resilience suddenly reveals itself as overextension. We're watching the early stages of that shift now. What seemed alarmist months ago already looks understated. The pace at which assumptions are being invalidated is accelerating. And yet, the optimism persists. Not because it is credible, but because it is necessary to keep the system moving one day longer. Understanding this logic helps explain why the budget looks the way it does. It is not a plan for prosperity, it's a delay mechanism. Russia's latest federal budget is not a roadmap, it's a mirror. Mirror that's reflecting system caught between reality and refusal. The numbers do not add up because they are not meant to. They are meant to reassure, to postpone reckoning, and to preserve the appearance of control in an environment where control is sleeping. All revenues are overestimated, growth is assumed rather than earned, inflation is prayed away, spending priorities reveal what truly matters and what no longer does. This does not mean that the collapse is imminent, just tomorrow. Systems like this can persist, unfortunately, longer than expected, precisely because they rely on gradual adjustments and managed expectations. But it does mean that the margin for error is shrinking fast. Each revision narrows the room to maneuver. Each optimistic forecast raises the eventual cost of correction. At some point, the fiction will become impossible to sustain. And when that happens, the adjustment will be abrupt. Not because economists failed to warn about it, but because the warnings were deliberately ignored. Until then, the budget will continue to be rewritten, recalculated, and represented each time insisting that next year will be better. Watching this unfold is less about numbers and more about understanding how power chooses to see the world. And right now, up until the moment, it can just simply no longer to observe and make any meaningful decisions. For the record, guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support our work, the links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are resolve they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.